And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I'm your host, Demo, and today it is 10 color-specific cards worth playing. So what does that mean? Well, we'll get into the first card and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Mirran Crusader. This is a card that was played quite a bit in the format. Again, back in the day, I don't see it hardly ever anymore. It has double strike, protection from black, protection from green. So what I mean by color specific is obviously this card cares about black and it cares about green. So it's color specific, right? If you have a Mirran Crusader on the table and no one at the table is playing black or green, those abilities don't do anything. So this becomes a really bad card. So all of the cards on this list are relying on your opponents to play these certain colors. Now, obviously, the reason why something like Mirran Crusader is on this list is because black and green are popular colors in the format. Quite certain that green is the most popular color in the format right now, which is why you're going to see a lot of green hate in this list. I know that EDH Recast did their monocolored rankings. So as far as monocolored decks go, black's number 1, green is number 2. So those are the top 2 monocolored colors. When you start combining colors, it gets a little more confusing. But as we all know, it is very unlikely that you're going to sit down at a table and none of your opponents are playing black or green. I mean, that's got to be 1 in a million. And likely there will be at least 1 or 2 of them that are playing both black and green. And a lot of these cards on this list have gotten a lot better, again, because people are putting more colors in their deck. I've said it 30 times on this channel now. Golos is the number 1 commander in the format. People are playing 5-color decks more and more and more. So these color-specific cards are getting better and better and better. So next up at number 9, Deathgrip. This is an old one. 2 mana, black enchantment, and you just pay 2 mana, counter target green spell. I mean, that's pretty brutal. You know, if you sit down at a table and no one's playing green, is just a dead card. It doesn't do anything. But the chances of that happening are extremely rare. I said before, I think if you sit down at a table and no one's playing green at all, and by the way, it doesn't have to be mono green, right? Atraxa is a green deck, right? Another very popular commander in the format. That is green. So this is somebody casts their Atraxa, you counter it, because that is a green spell, right? The more colors you have, the more effective these cards are going to be. Next up at number 8, this is a real mean one. Some of them are pretty mean, this one included. So, but I do make suggestions for people. You know, if in your pod this is the thing you do, then it's entirely up to you whether you want to use these or not. So Nature's Wrath, 6 mana enchantment, that's a lot, okay, and at the beginning of your upkeep you have to pay 1, so it has an upkeep. However, whenever a player puts a swamp or black permanent into play, he or she sacrifices a swamp or black permanent. Ouch. And whenever a player puts an island or blue permanent into play, he or she sacrifices an island or a blue permanent. Man, so this hoses black and blue. So obviously, this works on you too. So you don't want to put this in a Simic deck. You don't want to put this in a Golgari deck. You want this in a mono green deck or a Gruul deck or a Selesnya deck or anything that doesn't have black or blue, right? Because this is going to hurt you too, right? So basically, just to run through how this works, you have an opponent, they're playing black. And again, this is black and blue. The chances you sit down at a table and no one there's playing black and blue, astronomical. I don't even know if it ever happens. But so your opponent plays a swamp, right? As soon as they play a swamp, this triggers and it says, okay, now that player has to either sacrifice a swamp or a black permanent, right? It has to be a black permanent. It can't just be any permanent. It has to be something black. Same goes for islands. I mean, this is brutal. I mean, if someone's playing a Dimir deck, that's it. Game over. They're done for, I guess, if they can't get this off the table right away. And as I've already talked about quite a bit, Dimir isn't great at getting enchantments off the table. So this could just be game over for someone like that. You know, a lot of these cards, you can put them in your deck and just roll the dice and see what happens. You know, if you're playing in a group and you do have a lot of players in your group that are playing a lot of blue, a lot of black, maybe you want to try this out. I don't know. Coming in at number 7, Omen of Fire. So it's 5 mana, it's an instant, okay? And this one is a little bit different than the rest on the list. I came across this while I was doing my research for my 10 cards videos, and I just thought, man, this could be so good. So it's an instant. That I think is important. Return all islands to their owner's hands. Each player sacrifices a plains or a white permanent for each white permanent they control. Again, this is harsh, you know. know? And the reason I put this on the list, and I know someone will say, okay, well, what about Boil? Boil is just going to kill all islands. I like this better because it targets two things, okay? If you have a mono blue player at the table and you cast Boil, that guy's done for probably, unless he can counter it. But he's probably done for. But if you don't have a mono blue player, then it's like, okay, now the Atraxa deck, right? So let's take the Atraxa deck as the example. If you cast Boil, an Atraxa deck is going to, what's that going to kill? Like one island, maybe two? Let's say they have two islands in play for this example, right? And of course, something like a breeding pool, that's an island, right? That's not great. And, you know, maybe you have another opponent who's in the same boat. Maybe they're playing a Muldrotha deck. I just think because this hits both blue players and white players, and I know people say, okay, well, white's not that great. Yeah, but Atraxa is pretty great, right? There's lots of other, Tulane is pretty great, right? There's lots of decks that have white that are also really good. You don't just have to hate on the mono white deck here. This is hating on all decks that have white in them. I just like that this hits both white and blue. Next up, number 6, Order of the Sacred Torch. Let's stick it to black now, shall we? Right? This is a creature. 3 mana, 2/2, human knight. Just tap and pay 1 life to counter target black spell. That's pretty good. I mean, it's a lot like Deathgrip, where it's just going to sit there and counter spells. This doesn't require any mana, though. It can just sit there. And again, if you have a black player at the table, this can be really good. Next up, number 5, Bereavement. Okay, so this is a 2 mana enchantment. Whenever a green creature dies, its controller chooses and discards a card. Again, green, most popular color in the format. Green is, Muldrotha is green, right? Tulane is green. Atraxa is green. And they changed the dies trigger. So if this is your commander, it's still going to die, right? This is another thing where, you know, when they changed the dice trigger, it really affected a whole lot of cards. It wasn't really clear which cards would benefit from it and which wouldn't. This is one of the cards that benefits from it because now if you kill someone's commander, it's actually dying and this will actually trigger. And again, it can be brutal. Against a mono green deck, really brutal. Number 4, Insight. I just talked about this in one of my more recent 10 cards you should be putting in your commander deck videos. Again, this can be, and I'm not saying this is better than Rhystic Study, so don't start lambasting me in the comments. It can be. This can be better than a Rhystic Study, okay? If you sit down at a table and you have just 2 opponents that are playing green, and I don't mean mono green, I just mean they have green in their decks, you know, you can pay for Rhystic Study and it does nothing. There's a lot of people. And after I made the video about this, I had a few people that commented and said, yeah, in our pod, if someone plays a Rhystic Study, everyone pays, period. All right. So it just becomes a taxing effect and you draw nothing off of it. A card like this, and again, green is the most popular color in the format. You can draw a whole lot of cards off of this. Maybe even better, though, is my number 3, which is Compost. It's tough to fit cards in your deck like this. That's the problem with this, you know. For me, I have this in one deck. I have this in my Dragon Lord Atarka deck. I have had it in there since I first made the deck, and I just left it in there. And I don't want to take it out because I like to have cards like this in at least one deck. And I don't know how many times I've played that deck, but I've never played a game where I was against nobody who was playing black. So there's never been a case where it's just been a dead card in my hand. Black is a popular enough card in the format that this can be super good. And keep in mind, this is whenever a black card is put into opponent's graveyard, you get to draw a card, right? You don't have to kill their creatures. You don't have to, that's just if they discard a card. Whenever they cast a spell, if they cast a demonic tutor, that's a black card. When it resolves, that's going to go into their graveyard and you get to draw. Everything, they're discarding, their creatures are dying. Every time a black card goes into any opponent's graveyard, you get to draw. This can be super good. Coming in at number 2, Veil of Summer. You know, I mentioned this when I did my off-color spells, right? I put a Void Fate on that list and not Veil of Summer because Veil of Summer was color specific. The guy that commented, though, on that video said, yeah, but you're always going to play in a game with a guy who has a blue or black deck, so Veil of Summer doesn't work against the Path to Exile. A Void Fate does. But overall, Veil of Summer is probably the better card, also the more expensive card. But all in all, because blue and black are so popular in the format, at the end of the day, Veil of Summer is probably just better. It's also going to draw you a card, right? So it is technically just a better card. Really popular in the format, particularly in CEDH. You see this a lot. And number 1, Red Elemental Blast. You know, you could also say Pyroblast here. essentially the same card. There are minor differences when it comes to the rules. Choose one counter target blue spell, destroy target blue permanent. That is really powerful for 1 mana in an instant. Jimmy from the command zone puts this, he says red's his favorite color. He puts this in all his mono red decks. I know a few other people that put red elemental blast in all their mono red decks. Yes, you are relying on one color. If you do sit down at a table and no one's playing blue, and this has happened to me, I have Red Elemental Blast in my Clothis CEDH deck. And I actually sat down and had a game once and nobody was playing blue. I couldn't believe it. And I had Red Elemental Blast in my hand and it was just a dead draw. It was a useless card. So that sucked, but it's rare. It's got to be rare that happens, right? So yeah, a lot of mono. And that's why this is number one, because a lot of, especially mono red players, will put this in all their mono red decks. Again, you just think about something like Rhystic Study, and I've talked about certain things that certain colors can't do. Red's not great at getting rid of enchantments. This is one way to do it. If someone plays a Rhystic Study, you blast it and it's gone, right? I will also just point out Painter's Servant. There's lots of ways to manipulate these effects as well. You know, Whim of Volroth and Mind Bend effects and stuff like that, right? So you can manipulate these, where if you have a card like Deathgrip that can just counter black spells, and you can just, I had actually thought about making a deck around cards like this where I can just manipulate. And because all those effects are mostly in blue, I think you probably would have to play a blue deck that does this, right? Where you can change the color text on things to make these effects a lot more powerful. So that's another thing to think about. But that is just the top 10 color specific cards, mostly due to the popularity of certain colors in the format, right? Particularly green, black, and blue. So that is it for today. I have a Patreon now. If you feel like supporting the channel and you like my content, the link is in the description below. And thanks for tuning in.